Hello and welcome to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. I am your host for today, Kate Carter.
I'm Kylie Colwell.
And I'm Holly Spear.
And ladies, I have a different type of story today.
You say that, and then it's
I
never
promise
that.
you it's a different type of story today. It's a different type of story as in, well, I don't want to give it away, but it's not the normal type of story that I do. So my case, we're going to be talking about Tanya Nicole Kach. Tanya was born on October 14th, 1981, to her parents Jerry and Sherry, very difficult, and Tanya was their only child. The Kach family lived in Pennsylvania in a town called Monongahela, which is a pretty small town of around like 10,000 people. To say the name is just as hard to spell it. So it's nicknamed Mon City, M-O-N City. I'm going to be calling it Mon City for the rest of the time, okay? Because I'm not going to say that word again. This town is about 20 miles from Pittsburgh, so it's near the city, but it's definitely out in the sticks. It's really small, kind of hippie hobo-ish. So Tanya grew up there. Both of her parents worked normal jobs. She would often hang out with her mom after school because her mom's job was fortunately right out front of her bus stop. So when she would get off from school, she'd just walk inside and see her mom. Tanya spent the first 12 years of her life living in Mon City, and there she was a part of a local Girl Scout troop. She went to Bible study every week, and she was really involved in the church scene. But as Tanya got older, she noticed more and more how her parents were pretty much consistently unhappy with each other. They were constantly arguing, fighting a lot, and they would spend time apart. Like her mom and dad, either one would like leave for days at a time. They shared different bedrooms. So like there was basically constant tension in their house. At some point, her dad, Jerry, contracted a really bad case of pneumonia, and he was in the hospital for a few months. And during this time, Sherry, her mom, was at home receiving all of Jerry's medical bills, and it ended up putting their family into thousands of dollars in debt, which I can only imagine. Obviously, being in financial debt took a pretty big toll on her mom. Sherry ended up having to work more. Tanya was basically taking care of herself. And at one point, it really hit Sherry in a mental state. In the beginning, Sherry was acting paranoid. Her OCD was really bad. But at some point, it started like she thought people were following her. She thought she was seeing things. And then within like a few weeks, which is pretty quick, I'll say, for like this type of issues, she started to repeat phrases over and over to herself out loud, but like no one's in the room. It didn't make sense what she was saying. She would start laughing for no reason, which is really creepy, especially for this kind of podcast. And then at some point, she even lit the family's coffee table on fire inside of their house. So like she went bonkers. She basically just went downhill. In 1994, when Jerry, the dad, was back from the hospital, and this was around when Tanya was about 13 years old, her mom ended up soliciting herself for extra income. Obviously, Tanya was not okay with this. And there was one moment that Tanya recalls that some man called her mom like on the house phone, and Tanya answered the phone, and she told the man like to never call back, leave her mom alone. And when Sherry found out that Tanya had talked to this dude, she actually ended up attacking Tanya with a pair of scissors. That just kind of tells you the state wasn't too good. Like she grew up normal to an extent, and then stuff kind of just went downhill. Also, she was like 13, 14 years old, which is a horrible. Middle school sucks regardless. So imagine going through all of this as well while you're in middle school. After this attack with the scissors, that was kind of like the breaking point for Jerry, which I can't believe he waited that long. And he decided to divorce from Sherry. As the divorce was processing, Sherry actually ended up being institutionalized. So that's, probably what was best. All of that being said, Tanya's childhood ended up taking a quick turn once again when she was out of elementary school and into middle. And as we see a lot of this, Tanya started to act out in her normal day-to-day life. She started skipping school, she was smoking cigarettes, and she would often isolate herself from her family. But Jerry still wanted Tanya to have a semi-normal childhood. And at some point, Jerry ended up meeting a woman. Her name was Joanne, and the two of them began dating. In 1995, Jerry decided that he and Tanya were going to move in with Joanne and Joanne's 7-year-old son. They lived in a town called McKeesport. So obviously, Tanya had grew up in Mon City her whole life. She did not want to move. And it was only a 10-minute drive, but still, all of her friends were there. She'd gone to school. She's about to be in middle school. It's a real shitty time. And this caused some tension between Tanya, her dad, and her dad's new girlfriend, Joanne. McKeesport, where they ended up moving, is, though 10 minutes away, completely different from Mon City. It was double the size. It was a former steel plant that had been shut down. So there was a lot of poverty, a lot of crime, like just kind of not a good area. And once the Kach family moved into their new home, it was super obvious to Tanya that Joanne didn't like her. Joanne would often plan outings or activities and not invite her, which, like, you're like 13 years old. Your dad has a girlfriend and she's like, I'm going to invite my 7-year-old son and your dad, but you're not allowed to come. Like, we're going bowling. You're not allowed to come.
That's really sad.
And be putting bleach in her laundry.
Okay. Yeah, in her laundry. Joanne was pretty shitty. She would even turn off the electricity in Tanya's room at night so Tanya wouldn't be able to like call her friends or even turn her lights on. And then to make it worse, she removed Tanya's bedroom door because she thought Tanya was a bad influence on her son. So she wanted to keep a close eye on her. Which, by the way, did you guys ever have your door taken?
No.
No, I don't think my parents would even know how to take off a door.
Okay, well, I hope they're not listening to that because that will be offensive. I never had my door taken off, but my mom and dad had to switch the doorknob so that I couldn't lock it.
What were you doing, Kate? You're a bad
Oh,
kid.
no, I was just pissy. I was a pissy child. I had a lot of anger issues. So it was the whole thing. So, okay, now we're moving on. It's 1995, a year later. And Tanya begins attending the new school in her new town. This school is called Cornell. It's a middle and high school combined. So I'm going to say Cornell a lot. We are not talking about the really famous college institution at all. As it goes, being the new girl in town, Tanya was bullied a lot during her first year. She ended up getting into a lot of fights. She skipped class. And on multiple occasions, she was caught drinking and smoking weed. But her dad didn't really seem to care. He was more focused on his new girlfriend, his life with her, and he really just didn't try to help Tanya at all. Tanya would go to school and then she'd walk home instead of taking the bus. And at some point, she started getting catcalled by like some of the neighborhood men on her way back. And one of these men that was constantly harassing her was actually someone that she babysat for. So like imagine getting catcalled by like a dude you babysit for.
That's really annoying.
Taking a turn for the worse down the line at some point a few years later. This man actually ended up getting arrested because he had been soliciting oral sex from Tanya and threatening to kill her if she told anyone. So basically at this point in her life, Tanya's like, F adults, F everyone, I hate my life. And that all changed one day when she met 38-year-old Thomas Hose, who was the security guard at the Cornell Middle School. Let's dig into Thomas for a minute. Thomas was born in 1957 in McKeesport. His entire childhood and growing up, Thomas was really into the idea of being a police officer. He was very obsessed with them, as many little boys are. But Thomas ended up not graduating high school. He didn't get a GED, so he was not going to be able to become a police officer like he had dreamed. He had to figure out another career path to choose from, and he decided to go into drug dealing, the next obvious choice if you're not going to be a police officer. And then after that, he decided to go to cosmetology school. You think that's random, but he changed his career path from drug dealing to cosmetology school so that he could meet and hang out with women every day.
Other ways to do that other than going to cosmetology school.
I mean, it's not a bad gig if that's what you're there for,
Yeah.
It eventually worked because that's where he met his first wife. They quickly married and ended up having a child together. The child's name is Justin, but they soon divorced, and Thomas took everything from her that he possibly could. So that should tell you a little bit about him and the type of person he was. After the divorce, Thomas moved back in with his parents and began applying for new jobs. He eventually decided to apply to a private security company, and he somehow used fake references, a fake resume, everything was fake, and they hired him based off of that. Did no reference checks. It was basically like, we're taking your word. Thomas got this job, and his first assignment was a security officer to Cornell Middle School. And Thomas worked there for about a year prior to Tanya starting her school. Once Tanya began at Cornell, she heard from many other students that this Thomas security guy was really mean and to avoid him at all costs. But the first time that Tanya ran into Thomas, he started cracking jokes to her and she thought they were really funny. So it seemed that Thomas was like being nicer to Tanya. And in a way, because she started seeing him every day at school, he seemed to really be the only adult in her life that like paid attention to her. So every time Tanya saw him in the hallway, he would always talk to her. And eventually she started opening up about her home life and the problems she was going through. That's when Tanya and Thomas began writing letters to each other. They would give them to each other in the hallway secretively so that no one else would know. But instead of Thomas stopping it like he should have, because he was like 20 years older, basically, he would tell Tanya to write him more and more, and he would ask her to explain certain parts of her life to him. At some point, Thomas started writing Tanya letters, and in these letters, he would end everything with "I love you."
I knew where this was going.
Yeah, not good vibes. He would even put money in the letters and tell Tanya to go buy candy or cigarettes with it. So eventually, Thomas gave Tanya his phone number, and she began calling him after work. There was one day at school where Tanya got into a really bad fight with another girl, and Thomas ended up breaking it up. And after the fight was over, Thomas saw that Tanya's hand was bleeding. So he pulled her into a room where nobody else was, and he started kissing her hand.
Gross.
Nasty. So just to point out, Tanya's like 14 at the time. And I think Thomas is 35, 38.
Okay.
Twice the age. Fast forward to January 2nd, 1996. Thomas actually found Tanya and her friend Monica skipping class one day, and they were under a stairwell in the school. Thomas brought Monica up to the front office so that she would get in trouble, like get written up. But then he went back to Tanya and sat with her under the stairwell. And that was the first day that Thomas kissed Tanya.
I already want to throw up.
It's just going to get worse. We need a big, okay, I'm sorry. There's a big trigger warning for this story. This is going to deal with a lot of underage stuff. So over the next month, Thomas and Tanya would meet up under that exact stairwell to kiss multiple times throughout the week. Their relationship just grew from there. He started to encourage Tanya to run away from her home, and she would. She would leave for a week here or there at a time. Thomas would give her money and bus routes to get out of town. And Tanya obviously didn't have a good relationship with her dad and her dad's girlfriend. So she actually went back and would go to her mom's house in Mon City. But her mom, because she was court ordered, would always have to send Tanya back to her dad's. So like Tanya would get there, she'd be like, I'm escaping for a week, and her mom would just have to ship her back. Otherwise, she would get in legal trouble. Tanya wanted to stay with her mom, but also kind of didn't, because her mom had a new boyfriend named Craig, and Craig was apparently a dick. So, you know, not good, like, adults in Tanya's
Poor
life.
girl. Yeah.
So every time Tanya ran away, this is a very normal thing. Her dad would actually call the police to report her missing, which like, okay, Jerry, if you're going to do one thing, thank you. But after a while, the police kind of stopped worrying about Tanya every time he called, because it happened so often, like multiple times a month. But because Tanya kept being returned to her father's house, eventually Thomas told Tanya that she should just come live with him for a while to get away from her parents. On January 28th, 1996, Tanya went to Thomas's house for the first time, which, by the way, it's his parents' house that he lives at with his son. He told her that she could sleep in Justin's room. Justin is Thomas's kid, and he actually also went to the same school as Tanya. He was just 2 years younger. Obviously, super weird, not into it. Justin was like, what the hell is happening? This is weird, let alone sleeping in the same room together. But his dad told him that he was not allowed to say a word about Tanya to anyone else. Otherwise, he would be, quote, a dead boy. So,
Okay.
I assume it wasn't good for Justin either. That first day on January 28th, Thomas told Tanya that she wasn't allowed to leave Justin's room because he didn't want his parents finding out that she was in the house. Totally makes sense. So she wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. She just had to sit in the room because he didn't want the floors to creak and stuff like that. Justin that night slept on the floor and Tanya slept in his bed. The next day, Justin and Thomas both headed out to school, but Tanya stayed back and just sat in Justin's room for the entire day, trying to not make any noise so the grandparents wouldn't hear her. You would think Tanya would hate this, just being stuck in a room by herself, like not able to make noise. But she was kind of enjoying it because if you remember back at her dad's house, she had no privacy. So, like, this was the first time she was able to be by herself and have a door on the bedroom, you know? So it was almost nice for her to be there.
Sad. Yeah.
Yeah. At some point, I think it was like day 3 that Tanya was staying at Thomas's house. She met Thomas's friend and neighbor named Judy. So Judy was in the process of divorcing her husband, and Thomas had actually befriended that husband a few years ago, but then that husband went to court for raping a child. Look, this whole
These
story,
people.
this town ain't doing good.
Yeah, what is this town?
Yeah, McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Shout out. Look, you guys had a rep back in the 90s.
Yeah.
So Thomas had this friend who was a child rapist. Of course, the husband pled no contest to the charge, and he ended up only getting sentenced to probation. So after the husband and Judy decided to divorce, Thomas ended up still remaining friends with both of them, but Judy is the one that stayed in the house. So Thomas and Judy lived next to each other. At some point, Judy decided to talk to Thomas about the whole Tanya situation, living with him. And Judy went to Tanya and said, like, you shouldn't be here. This is inappropriate. But you also shouldn't have to go back to your dad's house. So Judy convinced Tanya to go back to her mom's house. And in order to get there, Judy contacted her mom's brother. So this is Uncle Greg now comes into the scene. He ain't going to be here for long. Judy, the neighbor, who she's going to done piss us off, just to let you know. She already pissed me off. She knows about Tanya living at Thomas's house. And she's like, Uncle Greg, come get your niece, bring her back to your sister's house, let her stay there. So Uncle Greg picked up Tanya from Judy's house, but instead of driving her to her mom's, he decided he was going to try to rape her in the car.
What?
And I don't mean to laugh. That's not funny, but it's just like, this is a shit show. Okay.
This is crazy. What the
Tanya.
heck?
Yeah.
Poor girl.
But because Tanya fought him off, the uncle ended up throwing out Tanya in the middle of the street, and she had to walk back to a nearby gas station to call her mom. Her mom said, I can't come get you. You got to go to your dad's because I'll have to take you there anyways. And that she wasn't going to pick her up. So Tanya had to walk back to her dad's house, which it was about 8 miles.
I'm sorry, but if I was her mom, freaking arrest me. I would not be sending my kid back.
Well, her mom's also got a lot of mental issues.
Yeah.
Remember? So like she doesn't, you know, and I don't think she told her mom about the uncle situation, but
Okay.
when you got back to her dad's house, she tried to tell him and his girlfriend Joanne about the uncle trying to rape her, and they didn't believe her. They said that she was a liar and that she was making up the story for attention. So it was at this time that Tanya decided she was done. She was like, this is it. I'm out of here. Like, screw all of you guys, which I get. So Tanya stayed the rest of the week at her dad's house, but then came up with a plan to leave forever. In February of 1996, Thomas was able to convince neighbor Judy to bring Tanya into her house for a little bit. But even though Tanya was now staying at Judy's house, Thomas would sneak in all the time for alone time with Tanya. At some point by the end of February, Judy was out of the house for a vacation, and Thomas busted through the front door completely drunk and demanded that Tanya have sex with him. But because Thomas had been taking care of Tanya, Tanya thought that she really didn't have an option, and she didn't want to upset him because he would make her go back to her parents' house. So that night, she lost her virginity to Thomas, who's twice her age.
Disgusting.
Once Judy got home a few days later, Thomas told her to dye Tanya's hair. And obviously, Judy didn't want to because she kind of knew what Thomas was doing here. But he threatened her, and she did it. So Tanya's hair went from blonde to red. At this point, Tanya had now been gone from her dad's house for a few weeks, and her dad kept calling the police to report her missing and to get updates on her. But like I said before, Tanya had run away so many times that the police basically just stopped looking for her, which is sad because this time around she needed to be found. Tanya's dad saw that the police weren't doing anything, so he decided to contact the state's children's services to see if they could figure out where Tanya was. Obviously, the first place they went to was her mom's house. But once they found that she wasn't there, Tanya's mom told them that Tanya would get to her house, usually call people on her phone. And so that's when the investigators went through her mom's phone and started calling the numbers that Tanya had dialed before. At some point, the investigators got a hold of Judy, Thomas's neighbor, but they never called Thomas, who was like the person that Tanya called the most. So I don't really understand how that happened. Like the investigators talked to Judy, but not to Thomas. Once Judy got off the phone with the investigators and told them absolutely nothing about Tanya living with her, she went over to Thomas's house and said, "Hey, Tanya can't stay here anymore because there's people trying to find her. I don't want to get in trouble." So Tanya left Judy's house and went back to staying at Thomas's parents' house with him. And for the next 4 years, Tanya never left the inside of Thomas's house.
No.
Bombshell. What the hell?
That's crazy.
Tanya went missing when she was around 14 years old. And because Thomas told Tanya he was doing her a favor by letting her stay there, he forced her to stay secluded in Justin's room for 4 years. She was only allowed to leave the room if he wanted her to have sex with him.
And the grandparents didn't know.
This gets me thinking right away. Like, she's not allowed to leave the room. So what happens when you got to use the bathroom? Well, nope, not allowed. Thomas gave Tanya a bucket and said, "This is your bathroom. You keep it in Justin's room." The only time Tanya was allowed to shower was at the same time as Thomas, which he only let her do it about once a month. Thomas didn't want any suspicion to his parents that there was another person living in their home. But another thing I obviously could not wrap my head around is Tanya is staying in Justin's room. Well, Justin is living there. He says nothing. He does nothing. He pretends it's absolutely normal, and he goes about his normal life as a 12-year-old at this point. I mean, I saw it in some articles, but it makes you think that Justin didn't say anything to anybody because he was basically petrified of his dad.
Yeah, and even if he wasn't scared, I feel like there has to be so much abnormal behavior out of a man who's willing to do this to a girl that obviously the way he raised his son is probably
not good.
Not good. Not saying that Justin's a bad person, but if your dad is the person that's going to be able to do this kind of thing, your childhood was probably not normal.
We'll get back to Justin later on that note.
Why is she still in Justin's room and not in his room? Like, if she's locked in there anyways, like the grandparents aren't going into Justin's room, but they're going into the dad's room?
No idea. I would like to think, because I couldn't figure out anything about this, I would like to think that maybe his room was right next to the parents' room or on the same floor. You know, like maybe Justin's room was further away, so it was going to be less noticeable.
Okay.
Maybe. As for food, because she never left the room, Thomas would give Tanya peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to eat. And because they made no mess and didn't require any plates or silverware. And then occasionally, about once a month, Thomas would give Tanya his leftover dinners as a treat.
Oh, wow. What a treat. I feel like this is so sad because it shows you how bad she hated her life at home that she's willing to live under these conditions. And at this point, she's probably feels like she can't leave at all. She probably feels bound to that house, but just that you'd put yourself in that situation rather than going home is sad.
It's just going to get worse, you guys. I'm really sorry to say that, but it's literally just going to get worse. So now I mentioned Tanya wasn't allowed to leave the room, and only if Thomas wanted sex. But get this. So Thomas required them to have sex twice a day. And each time that they had sex, Tanya was forced to write down the experience in a journal so that Thomas could read it. In the beginning, Tanya felt like she wasn't forced to have sex with Thomas, but more so that she owed him these favors because he would tell her every single day how he saved her life and how she owed this to him because he was the only person that cared about her.
Yeah, so she's being forced, basically.
Obviously, but like mentally, this is the only person adult-wise that has ever cared, shown affection. So like she's getting brainwashed, basically. Yep. And that's going to take a mental toll on someone who's 14. It took the mental toll, but it also took a physical one as well, because during the first year of her living in that bedroom, Tanya developed anorexia, which how could she not? She was only eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. She weighed under 90 pounds. She developed horrible acne and psoriasis. She had constant pain in her teeth and jaw due to the lack of hygiene, because I can only assume she did not or was not allowed to brush her teeth.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And sometimes during this year and years to come, Tanya would get extremely sick, and while this was happening, Thomas would have Tanya stay in the bedroom closet because he didn't want his parents hearing her throw up or moan in pain. At some point, Tanya also got lice. And when she told Thomas about it, Thomas threatened to, quote, dump her body in the river if him or Justin got the lice. But if you think about it, she could have only gotten the lice from Thomas or Justin because she didn't leave the bedroom. There's just no sense to it. But apparently this was the first time that Thomas had really threatened her, and he threatened to kill her. So that's a pretty big one. For some reason, here or there, Tanya's still 14, 15 years old. She decided she was going to write up like a will in a journal that she had with her, which smart girl. And in this journal, she wrote down her parents' names, their address, and then her location. So if for some reason she was ever killed by Thomas, at least they would know who did it. It wasn't until October 1996 that Tanya decided to leave the house for the first time. She packed up all little belongings that she had, and she waited for Thomas to get home from work. But when he got home, Tanya said she was leaving, and once again, he threatened to kill her. To give you a little more insight, because I was also very curious about this, how the hell did Thomas have custody of his son? Well, it turns out Thomas had threatened Justin's mom so much about killing her and killing all of her family if she tried to take Justin from him. So Thomas ended up with full custody, and the mom was never allowed to see Justin again. Tanya would also recall later on that Thomas quite often talked about killing people he didn't like and said that he was planning on killing Justin's mom and her boyfriend at some point. So this dude, he's just nuts. I mean, it's just, it just gets worse and worse. You also have to wonder in this whole story, because she's there for years, what is Tanya's family doing? Like, where are they? Where's the police? What's happening? Well, her dad at least tried to find her. Jerry would drive around town every day after work looking for Tanya or trying to find anyone who knew where she was. Jerry just kind of assumed that Tanya had run away for good, or maybe that she was living homeless and on the street somewhere. But the police, on the other hand, never looked for Tanya. She was so prone to running away, they just assumed at this point that's what she had done, and that she would maybe come back one day or be returned by her mom, which is kind of shitty because she's still underage. And so if she had ran away for good, they still should be going and finding her.
Yeah. I think they've gotten better about that. Like now you see missing posters or missing people posters, or like even Amber Alerts. It'll say runaway, but they're still looking.
Right.
Still a child.
This is the 90s. Yeah. So we've, almost 30 more years. So during Tanya's captivity, which is what I'm going to call it because that's what it is. I mean, she was forced to stay in a room, couldn't make noise, barely had any food. She was also not allowed to shower, sexually assaulted every day, and threatened to be killed if she left. So horrible captivity. Tanya obviously was able to get close to Justin, Thomas's son. I mean, she was living in his room. He slept in that room every night with her. And Justin was 2 years younger than Tanya, went to the same school, but he never told anyone about her being in the house. If people brought up the fact that Tanya had gone missing, he didn't even look. He didn't even bring anything into conversation. And at first, Tanya enjoyed Justin's presence because it was really nice to have somebody to talk to, especially since they were around the same age. But unfortunately, at some point, Justin showed his true colors and how he wasn't that different from his dad. He would often come home from school or wake Tanya up in the middle of the night and hold her down and sexually assault her.
Oh.
Yeah. Which he's also a baby, so how disgusting. During Tanya's second year in Thomas's house, so she was about to turn 16 at this point, she began to develop really bad OCD. She was in a daily and weekly routine where everything was the exact same. And for the next 5 years, it would stay the exact same. Around year 5, Tanya's mother ended up calling the Thomas's house. Apparently, she had been going through her phone records and saw that Tanya had called his phone number before, and she thought maybe Thomas would know of something or anything about where Tanya could be. Of course, when Tanya found out that her mother had called, she was thrilled to think that somebody actually still cared about her. But Thomas quickly shut that down and said her mom had only called because she was upset about her phone bill and that it was Tanya's fault. Which, I don't know how that makes any sense. First of all, it's 5 years after the fact. So I don't really know why her mom waited 5 years to call the phone numbers either. That's besides the point. But basically, Tanya's mom, fortunately, thought Thomas sounded suspicious on their phone calls. And so this was the first time in 5 years the police had gotten any kind of tip about where Tanya could be. But because Tanya's mom had mental health issues, what happened? Absolutely nothing. The police just did not a damn thing. They thought she was making up shit and they carried on with their lives. So at some point, someone anonymous, I would like to think it's probably the mom, called Thomas's phone and actually spoke with his mom. So the grandma, the person said they thought Tanya was in her house. She was being held captive by Thomas and that they were going to call the police. But when the police arrived, Thomas's mom was at home, so Thomas opened the door and was the one that spoke with the cops. Which, like, I also want to say this whole story, I was never able to find the ages for Thomas's parents, but the way that articles would like describe them was they were very elderly. You know, he's in his late 30s, early 40s, and if I had to guesstimate, they were already in their 80s. So the police arrived. Thomas's mom was at home. Thomas talked to the cops. But before Thomas went out there to talk to them, he told Tanya that if she heard anyone come into the house, she was to run in the basement and hide. When cops told Thomas about the tip they had received and asked if they could search the house, Thomas said, yeah, for sure, but you're not going to find anything. But you know what? I'm a little worried that you're going to wake up my elderly parents. So what did the cops do? They didn't go inside the house. They were like, yeah, he's right. We don't want to wake up his parents. We're just not going to follow up about the tip.
Yeah, wake up parents or possibly find a girl held.
A child.
Yeah,
a baby that's missing.
Yeah. No, for sure. We'll wait.
Is that not some shit? Like, that just pissed me off. So after the cops came to his house and then left, Thomas ended up taking it worse on Tanya, if that was even possible. He began drilling it into her head that she was only there to be a sex slave, and that he saved her life, so she has to do everything he says and wants. He would constantly tell her that no one loved her but him, and that she was, quote, put on this earth to take care of him, which I mean, he's grimy anyways, but like, how disgusting.
I'm sorry, I want him dead.
At some point, Tanya's dad, I mean, it had been like 5 years at this point, Tanya's dad and Joanne ended up buying a new home in a different town and sold their old one. And for some reason, this was printed in the local newspaper. So Thomas showed Tanya that article about how her family had moved on, and he said that they never cared about her. And then shortly after that, Tanya's mom remarried, and that was also in the newspaper. So once again, Thomas showed Tanya that article and was like, look, everyone gave up on you. Nobody cares that you're missing. Like, this should show you why you're here.
I hate him.
Yeah. And it was around this time as well that instead of threatening to kill Tanya if she did something wrong or if she tried to leave, Thomas began threatening to kill himself instead. He would say that if she ever left, he would commit suicide and that it would be her fault and she would go to jail. So obviously the brainwashing would take a mental toll.
I'd be like, go ahead then.
Yeah.
She's so brainwashed by this point.
Yeah. She's probably thinking if he does that, no one's going to take care of her.
Right. I mean, this case, like, you guys obviously know about like what this is, but like, this is a huge case for what Stockholm Syndrome is. For listeners who don't or may not know exactly what Stockholm Syndrome is, it's basically a psychological condition where a victim empathizes with their abuser or captor. So like they basically bond with them in some type of way, but it's definitely a mental, like, they've been brainwashed. It's basically like the victim has an attachment or affection to their abuser.
And she had an attachment before he was her captor, and now
it's just work.
Yeah.
At some point during Tanya's 5th year being stuck inside the house, because she hasn't left the house, she has not stepped foot outside in 5 years. Thomas began telling her stories about how these 2 girls from her school, Cornell, had been kidnapped and murdered within the past few years while Tanya was in captivity. One of the girls, 14-year-old Anna Marie Callahan, was a freshman at Cornell when she went missing, and her body was eventually found washed up on the Mon City River in 1995. Anna Marie was only about 4'10" and weighed around 80 pounds, so she was a tiny little thing. And when the police first arrived on scene, they believed that they were actually working on the death of a child just because of her appearance. So, like, absolutely small. Unfortunately, Anna Marie had been strangled by an extension cord, which was still wrapped around her neck. Her hands had been tied together with duct tape. And just a weird note as well, in her hands that were tied together was a bouquet of flowers. The last time that anyone had seen Anna Marie alive was the day prior to her body being found, and she was actually playing in the exact spot by the water where her deceased body would wash up on the next day. The second girl that Thomas told Tanya about was named Kimberly Krim, who was about 14 years old at the time that she went missing in 1998, while she was supposedly walking to a grocery store from her house. Her body was eventually found weeks later in a cemetery, which happened to be just a few blocks from Thomas's house. Kimberly's manner of death is actually unknown to this day because when her body was found, it was so decomposed that only her dental records were able to be used to identify her. And then, but get this, Kimberly, the second victim that Thomas told Tanya about, was the younger sister of Monica, who was Tanya's best friend. So like a little full circle moment happening. Thomas would go into details to Tanya about the murders, though none of the information was ever released publicly. He would drunkenly tell Tanya that victim Kimberly, her body had been laid against a hill in the cemetery, and she was found slumped over her knees with her underwear pulled down to her ankles. But Thomas would, of course, go on to tell Tanya that he only knew this information because cops had told him. Okay.
I have a feeling where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unfortunately, Anna Marie and Kimberly's murders are still cold cases to this day.
What?
At one point, Thomas brought home a newspaper for Tanya to read, which is something he did like every once in a while. And that's where Tanya was able to read more information about Kimberly's murder. In one of the articles, Tanya's name was actually mentioned, and the article stated that Tanya's name had been registered with the National Database for Missing and Exploded Children, which when Tanya saw this, she got really excited. She was like, people are still looking for me even years later. But when Thomas saw that Tanya was excited about this, he proceeded to shut her down, telling her that she was just another number in a database and that it didn't really mean that people cared. So, just more shit. Side note to this story, in 2019, so just a few years ago, Kimberly's niece was actually shot in the head at her high school prom in the same town and killed. Police have yet to arrest anyone for this murder as well.
What is in the water in this town?
What is going on?
He's poor. I'm telling you, I don't know, but not good. And poor, like, Kimberly's family and the niece's family, like, that's a lot.
Like a nuclear power plant nearby or something?
Well, it was shut. Remember, it was like a power plant town that got shut down. So, I mean, well, you're onto something there, Kylie.
I think it's poisoned everybody.
So, okay, remember Thomas's old neighbor, Judy, the little person we hate? Sometime down the line, she went back to Thomas's, like she moved away, did her own life, like was like, you have Tanya, I'm not dealing with this, see ya, never told anybody. She went back to Thomas's house to see if Tanya was still living there, but Thomas told her like, oh no, Tanya left years ago, I don't know where she is. But this whole situation just still pisses me off because Judy knew about Tanya being there for the first year. And like, she never reported it to the police. She never told anyone about it. Basically, she just protected Thomas the entire time. The first year that Tanya went missing, Judy was even questioned by the police and said nothing. So Judy, you suck ass, okay? Moving on. As the years went by, Tanya noticed that Thomas grew more and more controlling and mean to her. She would go on to say that she actually preferred Thomas when he was drunk or high because at least he would be nicer to her. By the time 2000 rolled around and Tanya was turning 18, she asked Thomas if she could leave the house. Of course, he said no, for years up to this point. But for one reason or another, he actually ended up changing his mind. A few days after Tanya's 18th birthday, Thomas gave Tanya $120 to go buy new clothes for herself. Because if you think about it, for the past years that she had been in confinement, Tanya had only had the same outfit from 1995 that she had left school in the day that she went to Thomas's house. That's the only thing that she was able to wear unless Thomas gave her some old hand-me-downs that he would like give her like once a year. Thomas gave Tanya exact bus directions to follow in order to get to a specific shopping center, which was in the town of Olympia. Thomas had Tanya go to this town because he thought after 4 years of being missing, no one would recognize her. And plus she looked different. She was older. Her hair was a different color. Tanya left the house for the first time, got on a bus, headed to this town. She ended up buying new clothes, but at no point did she feel like she needed to run. She was actually riddled with anxiety, extreme social anxiety, and she couldn't wait to get back to the house, which some of you might think is crazy. But after being locked in a room for 4 years with the threat that she was going to be murdered if she ever left Thomas, the amount of mental toll, this whole story, but like on her, she just couldn't wait to get back. So she didn't know any better than to go back to Thomas's house and go back into the bedroom she had been living in since she was 14.
I would also be scared that it was like a test. Like I haven't been able to leave the house all these years. All of a sudden you're giving me $120 and you want me to go to like a specific place and take a specific bus route. If I'd be like, 100%. Oh, he's following me. Yeah.
That's a test. And I wouldn't have been surprised. I didn't see anything but like that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Nope.
So once Tanya returned back to the house, she told Thomas that she didn't feel like leaving, but that he definitely needed to improve her living situation. Like, yeah. And Thomas actually took this well. I mean, the little girl he basically kidnapped was now telling him that she was never going to leave him. Thomas told Tanya a few days later that he had, quote unquote, spoken to a lawyer, which is total bullshit. Don't believe that Thomas did that for a second. And the lawyer said, oh, now that Tanya's 18 years old and legally adult, the best situation for them to do is to get married. Even though he told Tanya this, he was never planning on leaving his parents' home. It was a free place to stay. He wasn't going to leave. He had a job in town and he didn't want to risk losing Tanya. So he wasn't going to move, but I'll save the rest later in the story. Later in that year, we're in 2000, Thomas again gave Tanya money to go out shopping. He also started to allow Tanya to leave the bedroom at night once his parents were asleep. This is really sad. The only thing Tanya would do at night when she was allowed to leave the bedroom, which was about once a week, is she would go sit outside the house on the back porch and feed any of the stray animals that would walk by.
So sad. Kate.
I just think of like little kitty cats and she's like feeding the kitty cats.
You're going to make me cry.
I know. Yeah. It's always the animals. Just getting out of the bedroom once a week was basically satisfactory enough for her. So when Tanya was given this second set of money and said that she was allowed to leave, she went to a place called JJ's Convenience Store. And this store was owned by a local man named Joe. So over the next 5 years, between 2000 and 2005, remember she went in at 1996. Tanya was allowed to leave the house 2 to 3 times a year, and every single time she would go to JJ's Convenience Store and she would have conversations with Joe. So she like got to know him pretty well. And fun fact, we find out Joe is actually Thomas's direct neighbor, like direct house next door. So Tanya, from the bedroom window in Justin's room where she lived, could actually see Joe and his family. And she would watch them often and just like think, you know, like this is what life could be, or, you know, so she always thought Joe was like this nice guy. So every time she was allowed to leave the house, she would always go visit Joe at this convenience store.
Please tell me Joe's a good guy or I'm going to put something in my ear.
To mess with your brain? Is that what you're talking about?
I can't hear it. I can't hear it.
Okay. I thought you were talking about just like offing yourself.
No, I mean, no. But like, I can't hear another bad man taking advantage of her. This is just...
Well, we're going to come back to Joe.
Okay.
Moving on. November 4th, 2004, Thomas asked Tanya to marry him. And the way that he did it is just like how they met. He wrote Tanya a letter. And in that letter, he asked her hand in marriage and put yes or no and told her to circle one.
Oh.
She eventually returned the letter back to Thomas and she circled yes.
Oh.
So, even though Thomas said he was going to marry Tanya, he ended up not doing it. He just kept making excuses to her, like he was too busy or he didn't have the money to buy a ring, etc. And on top of that, Thomas then started to treat Tanya even worse, which, how are we going to do that? Well, he would often forget to bring her food. Forget to bring her food. He would have her stay in the bedroom closet more often. He would forget to bring her toilet paper, so she would have to wipe herself with notebook paper. He was only letting her shower once every other month at this point. And because of this, Tanya started to complain more and more to Thomas about her situation and how awful he was being. And when she was complaining to Thomas, which like, finally, Tanya, okay, she started to speak louder and louder. So Thomas started to get worried that his parents were going to hear her and figure out that she was in the house, because they still didn't know 8 years into her being there. I just have to imagine that they're really old, or like, hopefully that's what I'm thinking in my head.
I mean, in my head, I imagine like a house where they can't access that part of the house. Like maybe it's upstairs and they are elderly and can't walk upstairs. And that's why he even put her in the room with Justin in the first place.
Yeah. Tanya's starting to revolt a little bit. Thomas is getting worried his parents are going to find out. So he came up with a plan. He was going to allow Tanya more freedom and figure out a way that his parents wouldn't catch on to it. So he gave Tanya a fake name and began talking to his parents about this fake name person and how he had a new girlfriend and she was going to be coming by quite often to visit him. So that they were aware of like who she was. And that is how Tanya met his parents for the first time in 8 years. Because they didn't have any idea she was living there, they didn't really take much into account. They thought everything was normal and went around their business. And so from there, every time Tanya came over to the house to visit, she just pretended to leave the house in the end, but would actually just walk back upstairs to Justin's room.
I'm just like imagining them sitting in the living room and he's like, oh yeah, my girlfriend's coming over, and she just walks downstairs.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Another thing that pissed me off, like his parents were like, oh yeah, this is normal, this is cool. Okay, she's half his age. Like she's 18.
Yeah. Do they know that?
You would be able to look at the pictures, Holly.
Yeah.
Look at the pictures. Like it's very obvious that she is a baby.
Yeah.
He's a grown man. But I did see lots of things where, and I didn't really include it in the story, I don't know why, but I did see lots of things where like he was probably abusive to his parents as well. So they most likely were just like, live your life, please don't hurt us kind of thing, you know?
This man is a monster.
Yeah. But on June 17th, 2005, things started to change for Tanya, Thomas, and his household. Tanya would often visit Eleanor, Thomas's mom, downstairs in the house, but it was quite obvious to Tanya that Eleanor no longer approved of her because she was so young and dating Thomas, who was almost 50 at this point. Eleanor would start to yell at Tanya anytime she came over for visits, but her husband, Bud, Thomas's dad, came in to calm things down. Bud actually was a really nice guy, so we like him. He was a sweet older man, and he would often care for Tanya as if she was his own child, which obviously Tanya loved because she had no parental figures. But Eleanor would still get really pissy, so Thomas one time told Tanya to go for a walk in the neighborhood while he went to calm his mom down. And this is when Tanya left the house and walked past a thrift store for the first time. And she decided to go in this thrift store. Behind the counter, there was one woman named Jennifer who started talking to Tanya, and she was super nice to her. Jennifer even asked Tanya at some point if she like wanted to help out around the shop, and Tanya did. So it was this new thing. Once a week, Tanya would go to this thrift store and like help out running around the place. So this thrift store was run by a Methodist church, which if you remember from the beginning of the story, Tanya was really into like Bible studies and stuff like that. So by interacting with this thrift store, she ended up attending church services and Bible studies. And then she would just go back to Thomas's house afterwards. Obviously, Thomas hated all of this because she was leaving more often and often. And he would often try to physically fight Tanya when she wanted to leave. But at some point, Tanya started threatening Thomas, saying like, if you don't let me leave, I'm going to tell people about you. So like he would back down. A few weeks later, Joe, the owner of that convenience store I told you guys about, saw Tanya and was like, hey, do you want to work at the convenience store? We have some hours we can give you. Tanya was like, hell yeah, definitely want to do that. Obviously not something that Thomas approved of, but Tanya liked this freedom. And once again, she would obviously threaten to expose him. But something that caught Joe's attention is that when Tanya was filling out paperwork to work at the convenience store, she literally did not know most of the information about herself, like social security number. Don't know it, probably don't have one, doesn't make any sense. Tanya's 23 at this point, so 9 years past captivity point, and she wasn't able to provide Joe with most of her personal information. So that ended up not working out. She didn't work at the store because she couldn't fill out the application. But Joe kind of kept this in the back of his mind. Even though Tanya had found this new freedom of hers 9 years after leaving her dad's house for the last time, Thomas still had complete control over her. She wasn't allowed to be out past 3 p.m. She had to give Thomas sex every day, otherwise she wasn't allowed to leave the house. And she also had to take care of Thomas's dad, Bud, whose health was now rapidly declining. But Tanya being able to leave the house and have a well, not really, but normal experience of life, she was able to see how people acted and how relationships were outside of Thomas and what he had been giving her. So this thought of escaping kind of slowly started to creep into her mind again. A few weeks later, after Christmas 2006, Tanya was at JJ's convenience store talking to Joe when she noticed a man just staring at her. At first, she was like, okay, it's just a creepy dude watching me. But when she looked at his face, she realized that this man was actually the former cop who used to always pick Tanya up from her mom's and bring her back to her dad's. Yeah. And this man just stood there and he was staring at her. And at some point, he put all of his groceries down and just walked out of the store. But nothing came of this situation.
What?
He obviously looked like he was staring enough that she was like, okay, creeper. And then she recognized him. He obviously was like, I know this face. Sure, it's been 9 years later, but like there was a reason they said he had his groceries, put them on the floor and just walked out.
Do your job.
Nothing ever came of that situation. On March 21st, 2006, 10 years after her first captivity, Tanya decided that it was time for her to talk to Joe about what had really been going on in her life. Tanya often talked to Joe about her relationship problems with Thomas, and Joe would always question why Tanya was with him or why she just wouldn't leave him. He didn't really understand the whole age gap thing as well, which makes sense. And on March 21st, Tanya walked into that convenience store and walked right up to Joe, intending to tell him everything. But her nerves got the best of her, and she ran to the back of the store and sat in an empty office for a few hours. At some point, Joe went back there to talk to her, and this is when Tanya broke down and stated, quote for quote, "I am not who you think I am. I'm a horrible person." Obviously, hearing this, Joe is in shock. He's like, what's going on? I've known you for years. And he asked Tanya, like, have you killed someone? Have you hurt somebody? Because that's the first, if someone's like, I'm a horrible person, you don't know me. I also would be like, so what you did? What have you done?
Yeah.
Tanya obviously said no to the whole situation. And then she decided to tell him everything. And Joe, who is this amazing little baby angel, decided to sit there and listen to everything that Tanya said, just patiently waiting. In the end, Joe told Tanya to go back to Thomas's house and to act as if everything was normal. He told her that she needed to go back one more time and wait for the police to arrive. So Tanya left the convenience store that day, headed back to Thomas's, and that's when Joe contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and was able to confirm who Tanya really was, a missing child of 10 years. Obviously, the next step was for Joe to call the police, and when he did, I'm not even kidding you, they picked up the phone and they said, "We're busy right now. Can you call back tomorrow?"
What?
Joe was like, this missing girl of 10 years has been held captive by a creepy man. Horrible things have happened to her. And they're like, busy right now. Can you call back tomorrow? Isn't that some bullshit?
Yes, I have no words.
So, fortunately, Joe, his son, used to be a former police officer. So Joe called his son, and his son was able to get into some contact with the police, and they called Joe back. But like absolutely nuts. So at the same time all these phone calls are happening, Tanya returned back to Thomas's house and tried her best to make everything look normal and like that she wasn't nervous. But Thomas was picking up some weird vibes from her and kept asking her if she was okay. She played him off multiple times, which like he started getting pissed about. So he went upstairs to calm down. It was at this exact moment when he went upstairs that a police officer knocked on the front door. Tanya ran to the door, answered it, and the officer asked if she was Tanya Nicole Kach. She said yes, and that's when police swarmed the house for the first time and placed Thomas under arrest. And get this, okay. So Thomas's parents are home while this is happening. Eleanor, Thomas's mom, asked the police what was going on, and they told her that her son had been keeping Tanya hostage for the past 10 years in their house, abusing her. Eleanor responded with, okay, and then she went to the kitchen and just stared out of the window while the police took Thomas away. Just makes me assume she knew.
Yeah, or she's senile.
Yeah, that's true.
Or it's the radiation.
From the power plant. Not a single thing said that, Kylie. So we don't know if that's true, but that's not a bad idea.
This is my new conspiracy theory, and I will be looking into this further when we log off.
Okay, sounds good. As Thomas is being taken away by the police, Tanya is standing at the front door, and he started yelling to Tanya that she was a traitor. And that was his last words to her. Fast forward to 2007, Thomas Hose pled guilty to, ready for this? Statutory sexual assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, indecent assault and endangering the welfare of a child, corruption of a minor, interference with the custody of a child, and aggravated incident assault. Thomas's neighbor, Judy, who we hate, actually ended up getting in trouble. She was sentenced to 6 to 23 months of jail time in the role of Tanya's kidnapping. Don't know how long she ended up serving for, couldn't figure it out, but I assume it was probably like the 6 months, like the lowest that you could get. At some point, Tanya sued the city of McKeesport for their lack of action on her disappearance, but for some reason or another, this lawsuit ended up being thrown out. After Tanya left Thomas's house for the very last time, she was reunited with her dad. But unfortunately, after her dad found out the details of Tanya's past 10 years, he ended up blaming Tanya for what had happened to her because she was, quote, the one that left.
I hate everybody.
Ugh. Yeah. And then Joanne, the dad's girlfriend, who's still around, said Tanya did this to herself and that she was just playing victim.
Oh my gosh.
As for Tanya, she ended up developing severe spinal issues from being held in Thomas's small-ass bedroom for 10 years. She had diminishing vision due to being kept in the dark for so long, and she ended up being diagnosed with severe PTSD. Along with all of that, she unfortunately was also no longer able to have children of her own due to the sexual violence that Thomas had inflicted on her as a child. And then on top of all of that, Tanya actually ended up receiving a lot of backlash in the local community because people didn't understand why Tanya just never left. People suck.
I just can't.
So it's just going to get worse, you guys.
No, what?
Let's just end it here.
Yeah, and with that, thanks for tuning in to another episode.
So you're wondering what happened to Thomas, right? Okay. He ended up serving only 15 years. He was released in 2022. He is registered as a sex offender, but he is living his normal life back in McKeesport, back at his parents' house.
And is the address easily findable?
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's
okay.
Registered. So I talked about this in the podcast. I do want to bring it up though, because I saw this in a lot of articles as well. Those 2 girls who were killed during Tanya's captivity and, how Thomas knew all the details. Well, to this day, even though Tanya has said all of this, she's actually released a book, which is supposed to be really good. I haven't read it, but I took a lot of information from there. To this day, Thomas has never been looked at as a suspect for either of the murders or tested for the DNA that was found at both scenes. There are many petitions online trying to get the cops or anyone to look into the potential fact that Thomas was indeed the person that murdered both of those girls.
Do you not have to give your DNA to be if you're a registered sex offender?
No, they apparently have not matched it for some type of reason.
So yeah, they would have his DNA, and also when you go to prison, you have to give a DNA sample. So they have it on file. They just haven't compared the two.
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Makes sense. Gotcha.
On more of a positive note, to end the case today, in 2008, Tanya began a relationship, her first relationship technically of her entire life, with a man named Carl, who she ended up marrying 10 years later in 2018. During those 10 years, Tanya also finished her high school education by getting a GED and now actually works for the Missing and Exploited Persons Organization. So kind of like a full circle moment.
Wow.
2017, Tanya released a self-written memoir about her experience, which is called The Memoir of a Milk Carton Kid. After this book was released, Tanya's dad, Jerry, and his stepmom, Joanne, actually sued Tanya for defamation, saying the book ruined their reputation and that, of course, Tanya had been lying all about it.
Go to hell.
This case is still open in the court system.
We are going to show up for Tanya.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be there.
I mean, just to end it, that's the story of the kidnapping and captivity of Tanya Kach.
I'm angry.
Brutal, isn't it?
I'm mad.
I told you today was going to be a different kind of case.
And you meant it.
And also, listeners can't see this, but we'll definitely post. Can we talk about what Thomas looks like? If you say rapist, kidnapper, child molester, it is Thomas's face.
Yeah.
He looks horrible, but as he should. And with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information, including photos of the case, you can check us out on our blog at overmydeadpod.com. Please be sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this. And as always, check us out on social media at OverMyDeadPod. And we will see you next week with another case. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. This was a very maddening story, Kate. I hope we have a very funny overtime to come out from this so I can have a better day today.
You know what? I was going to talk about something else in overtime, but it's honestly just a mood dampener. So let's talk about something fun.
Okay, I have something. Okay, you guys haven't watched it yet, but I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis of Chimp Crazy on HBO.
Tell me about. So Kylie texted us and was like, "Have you guys watched this series?" I haven't even heard of it.
Because you're not on TikTok, that's why.
Not at all.
Okay, so it's made by the same guy who did Tiger King. So obviously we're off to a great start, right? But this time we're focusing on chimpanzees.
Oh.
And it starts off, there's this place in Missouri, like up in the Ozarks. This lady, she has a bunch of chimpanzees. She's like an old lady. And her facilities, it's a bit neglectful, to the chimpanzees. And this one lady, Tanya, she starts working there. And then there's this other lady that starts working there. And this Tanya lady, she's the focus of the documentary. She, like, you remember Jennifer Coolidge's character from Another Cinderella Story, like Hilary Duff?
Yeah.
Like big blonde wigs, fake boobs, fake lips, really bad eyelash extensions, bright hot pink eyeshadow, full nines, right?
Yes.
She starts working there. She's trying to help out. And another girl that's working there reports the chimpanzee facility to PETA.
Okay.
So PETA sues them, and they're like, we're going to take all these chimps, and we're going to bring them down to Florida at a chimp sanctuary. And Tanya's like, hell no, you're not taking these chimps. Like, she's got this, like, weird fascination with them. Like, she keeps repeatedly saying she loves them more than her own children. And honestly, it kind of vibes. I think she was having relations with one of them. But so they lose the court case, whatever. And so then PETA comes to get the chimps, and there's one missing. Her favorite chimp, who's also famous. He was like in movies. His name's Tonka, right?
Yeah.
And so then the whole time, Tanya's like, no, like Tonka died. Like the night before PETA showed up, like Tonka had a heart attack. He died. And they keep going back and forth. Like they don't know where he is. And she's crying in these like court cases. She's like, no, he's dead. Like I walked in on him. I tried to like give him CPR. And she shows like the documentary people, his ashes and stuff. And it's not really adding up. And then they're like, okay, well, how did you like cremate a chimpanzee? And so she had her husband write this thing like, oh, we put him in a fire pit. We burned him at like 100 something degrees. And they're like, you can't cremate someone at like 100 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And she's just going back and forth with these PETA people in the court case. And she's meanwhile getting Botox and lip filler in the back of a nail salon by a guy who looks like my dad. She wins the court case. They're like, okay, Tonka's probably dead. We don't know where he is. She takes the documentary people down to her basement. There he is.
In the documentary.
Yes. So then the documentary people are like, what do we do? Like, he looks like he's in bad health. He's just like caged in the basement.
Aww.
Like, he doesn't go outside. Like, he's not being well taken care of. And the whole time they're like, do we tell PETA, like, he's in the basement?
Yeah.
And also, like, we want to keep making this documentary. So they do end up telling them. And they finally get the chimpanzee. And the whole time, Tanya's like, I don't know who told them.
You don't? Girl.
She's nuts.
Oh my God, she's nuts. And then we finally take him to a sanctuary. It turns out all of his like health problems and stuff was because he was only eating like McDonald's.
Oh my God, such animal abuse.
That's sad.
Tanya is still trying to get him back. And she also has a petting zoo at her house. And she's not allowed to own chimpanzees, but she can own any other kind of monkey.
Oh my God. Why? I just don't even think people should be able to own a monkey.
No.
I don't
like you can have dogs, cats, like exotic lizards, snakes, whatever, but like these large animals, I don't understand why it's legal.
No, and like they're smart, intelligent animals. I don't think they should be in cages.
Yeah. Not that far off from owning a child.
They kept talking about the cases like that one that ripped that lady's face off.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the scientist and, like had worked with him forever, right?
No, this is one like her friend owned the chimp and she like came over one day and he just like 90% murdered her in the driveway.
Ugh. Yeah, they're unpredictable, I feel like.
Yeah, so that was my quick review and synopsis of Chimp Crazy, but I do need you guys to watch The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives because that we would have to have a discussion on.
I've heard
I was going to do it this weekend and I thought it was on Netflix and I searched for it and I figured out it's on Hulu, which I do have Hulu, but I need to watch it. It's not going to be something that Luke enjoys watching, so I'm going to have to watch it by myself because he definitely would not love it.
I don't know. I think he would. I didn't think I would like it. I didn't know anything about it and I don't really watch much reality TV, but it was juicy.
Really? Okay.
All I knew, like, I don't know anything much about the show, but I knew the whole scandal, like the TikTok scandal from last year with one of the girls who, like, they exposed swinger club, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Inner circle swinger club. But then that girl was also arrested for domestic violence on her now ex-husband.
No way.
No, it's a new boyfriend. Yeah, that's in the pilot. Just the whole first episode. They're filming the show during that.
While that's happening. Yeah.
Interesting.
Taylor or something like that. I can't remember.
Taylor.
But I've heard really big things about that show.
Yeah, it's all over everything right now. I've got to watch it. I do plan on doing that.
I'll watch it within the next year, whenever I get free time. I have a child on my lap. You know what? Maybe Millie can watch it with me.
I think she'd like it.
Okay, I don't want to talk about it much because it's going to piss me off, but I just wanted to say, watch the VMAs. Wonderful. I have now found and decided, how like we shat on Jennifer Lopez. I have someone else that I hate. And I just forgot. And I forgot, but there's no reason that I hate her. She just, there's something about her that just bothers me so much. Camila Cabello.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I
don't love her.
There's something. She's never done anything, but there's just something about her that I cannot stand.
I agree. I don't know what it is, but I can't put my finger on it. She's never been my favorite. And now it's her that has all the drama with Sabrina Carpenter right now over.
Yeah.
What's his face?
Shawn Mendes, I thought was gay.
Yeah, I've always thought he was a little fruity. But yeah, because like Camilla was with Shawn, they broke up. He was with Sabrina. Now he's back with Camila. I don't know, whatever, Team Sabrina. But she just, every time I see Camila Cabello. I'm just like, there's something about her where I'm just like, I would rather not.
Yeah, same. I agree.
What an episode. What an episode. So much. Okay, well, I'm good.
Stood by your word, Kate. You did a very different episode than what
I did sprinkle in a little bit of murder, but obviously that's unfortunate. We have no information or leads on that. But if anybody knows McKeesport, please, Pennsylvania, you guys know anything about those 2 murders of the young girls in 1994 and 1998, say something, do something. Also,
get out of there as
talk to neighbors. Talk to neighbors because they're acting a little weird.
I did look it up. Obviously, nuclear power plants cause cancer. I'm thinking everybody in this story had brain cancer.
Nuts, right? Like, let's just assume.
Let's just assume for the sake of my brain that is unable to comprehend these people's actions. Let's just say they're not right.
It's such a frustrating story.
Yeah, we have a nuclear plant in Russellville.
Well, that explains you.
That's gonna say a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Crazy. She's gonna own chimpanzees in a few years.
Yeah.